In the years following World War II, the world entered a new kind of conflict. Unlike traditional wars fought with tanks and armies, this battle was built on secrecy, espionage, and fear. The United States and the Soviet Union had emerged as rival superpowers, and both sides believed the other was developing dangerous new methods of psychological warfare. This period became known as the Cold War. Every piece of information mattered. Every rumor was treated as a potential threat. Intelligence agencies operated in the shadows, racing to gain advantages that could determine the future balance of global power. It was a world where governments feared not only weapons but ideas, propaganda, manipulation, and the possibility that the human mind itself could become a battlefield. Reports began circulating that American prisoners captured during the Korean War had returned home changed. Some appeared emotionally broken. Others publicly criticized the United States or expressed sympathy toward communist ideology. To intelligence officials, this raised an alarming question. Had enemy governments discovered a way to control human behavior? The fear spread quickly through military and intelligence communities. Newspapers and political figures began discussing the possibility of brainwashing, a term that soon captured public imagination. Stories of psychological conditioning and forced confessions created a growing sense of paranoia. If enemy nations could manipulate thoughts, memories, or beliefs, then traditional military strength might no longer be enough. Inside the Central Intelligence Agency, concern intensified. The agency had been created to protect American interests during a time of rising global tension. But the Cold War presented challenges unlike anything seen before. Intelligence officials feared they were falling behind in an invisible war, one fought not with bullets but with information and influence. This anxiety pushed the CIA toward increasingly unconventional ideas. Officials began exploring whether science and psychology could be used as weapons. Could drugs force someone to reveal secrets? Could hypnosis manipulate behavior? Could memories be altered or erased? And perhaps most disturbing of all, could a human mind be controlled? At the time, these questions sounded less like science fiction and more like national security priorities. The atmosphere of fear made extreme ideas appear reasonable. Intelligence leaders believed they could not afford to ignore any possibility, no matter how controversial. If rival nations were experimenting with psychological manipulation, then the United States had to understand it first, or risk becoming vulnerable. As a result, secret research programs quietly began to emerge. Early experiments focused on chemical substances, interrogation techniques, and methods of influencing mental states. Scientists, psychologists, and researchers were recruited to study human behavior under unusual conditions. Many of these projects operated under heavy secrecy, hidden behind coded names and classified budgets. Over time, these separate efforts evolved into something much larger. A covert program designed to investigate mind control, behavioral manipulation, and psychological experimentation. Its name was MKUltra. Officially launched during the 1950s, the project became one of the most secretive operations ever conducted by the Central Intelligence Agency. Very few people outside the program knew it existed. Even within the government, information was tightly restricted. Records were compartmentalized, and participants were often unaware of the full scope of the operation. The goals of MKUltra were broad and deeply unsettling. Researchers sought ways to weaken resistance during interrogations, influence decision-making, and alter perception. Some believed chemicals could unlock hidden information from the human mind. Others explored whether psychological techniques could reshape memory or behavior entirely. To those involved, the project was justified as a matter of survival. The Cold War had created a climate where fear overshadowed caution. Intelligence agencies believed the enemy might already possess capabilities that could threaten national security in ways the world had never seen before. In that environment, ethical boundaries became increasingly blurred. What began as an effort to protect the nation gradually transformed into something far more controversial. Behind closed doors, hidden from public view, experiments were being planned that would eventually shock the world once they became known. And as the program expanded, the line between scientific research and human exploitation would become dangerously thin. Because once governments begin searching for ways to control the mind, there are very few limits they are unwilling to cross. As the Cold War intensified, the secret program known as MKUltra began expanding far beyond its original scope. What started as a theoretical investigation into psychological warfare quickly evolved into a network of hidden experiments carried out across the United States and beyond. The program was no longer limited to a few intelligence officials discussing possibilities behind closed doors. It had become active. Researchers, scientists, psychologists, and medical professionals were quietly recruited into various subprojects connected to the Central Intelligence Agency. Some participants understood they were assisting national security efforts. Others had little knowledge of who was truly funding the research. Universities, hospitals, laboratories, and private institutions became linked to experiments operating under layers of secrecy. The objective was simple in theory but dangerous in practice: discover methods capable of influencing the human mind. Among the many substances tested during the program, one attracted particular attention: LSD. At the time, LSD was still relatively unknown to the public. Intelligence officials became fascinated by its psychological effects, believing it might hold the key to altering perception, weakening resistance, or controlling behavior during interrogations. Some within the agency even speculated that the drug could function as a truth serum, forcing individuals to reveal secrets or become more vulnerable to suggestion. Experiments involving LSD expanded rapidly. In some cases, volunteers knowingly participated in testing. In others, subjects were given the substance without their consent or knowledge. The results were unpredictable. Reactions ranged from confusion and fear to paranoia, hallucinations, and severe psychological distress. What made these experiments especially controversial was the secrecy surrounding them. Many individuals had no idea they were part of government-funded research. Some believed they were participating in normal medical studies. Others were exposed to substances in social settings without warning. The lack of informed consent created ethical violations that would later become central to public outrage surrounding the program. But drugs were only one part of the experiments. Researchers also explored isolation techniques, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and sleep disruption. The idea was to push the human mind into vulnerable states where behavior might become easier to influence or manipulate. Subjects were placed in environments designed to disorient them. Bright lights, repetitive sounds, prolonged isolation, and interrupted sleep patterns were used to study mental responses under stress. In some experiments, participants were kept awake for extended periods while undergoing psychological testing. In others, sensory input was restricted entirely, leaving individuals isolated in silence and darkness. The results were often disturbing. Rather than producing reliable methods of control, many experiments caused emotional instability, anxiety, confusion, and long-term psychological trauma. Yet despite these outcomes, the program continued to grow. Another controversial aspect of MKUltra involved the use of secret observation sites. The Central Intelligence Agency established hidden apartments and safe houses, where human behavior could be monitored without subjects fully understanding the situation. Some locations contained one-way mirrors, concealed recording equipment, and hidden microphones. Individuals inside these environments were unknowingly observed while interacting under the influence of drugs or psychological manipulation. To intelligence officials overseeing the program, these operations were considered necessary research. They believed they were competing in a hidden war where enemies might already possess similar capabilities. The fear of falling behind during the Cold War became the justification for increasingly extreme methods. However, not everyone involved was comfortable with what they witnessed. Some researchers privately questioned the morality of the experiments. Others worried that the lack of oversight and accountability had created an environment where ethical boundaries no longer existed. But secrecy protected the program from outside scrutiny. Information was tightly compartmentalized, and many participants only saw small fragments of the larger operation. As years passed, MKUltra evolved into a vast and complex network of subprojects, many operating under different names and objectives. Records were hidden within classified systems, making it difficult even for government officials to understand the full extent of the program. Meanwhile, the experiments themselves became darker. The original goal had been intelligence and national defense. But over time, the line between scientific research and human experimentation began to disappear completely. Subjects were treated less as individuals and more as test material, people whose reactions, fears, and suffering could be measured in pursuit of results. And while much of the public remained unaware, the consequences were already beginning to surface. Behind the secrecy, hidden from view, lives were being changed in ways that many victims would never fully understand. Some experienced lasting psychological damage. Others struggled with unexplained trauma, memory issues, or emotional instability long after the experiments ended. Yet the program continued, protected by secrecy, driven by fear, and fueled by the belief that controlling the human mind might one day become the ultimate weapon. As the experiments expanded, the human cost of MKUltra became increasingly difficult to ignore. Behind the classified reports and secret budgets were real people, many of whom never fully understood what had happened to them. Some subjects entered experiments believing they were participating in ordinary medical studies. Others had no idea they were involved at all. They were exposed to drugs, psychological stress, and extreme testing methods without informed consent. In many cases, participants left the experiments confused, traumatized, and permanently affected. The psychological consequences varied from person to person. Some individuals reported severe anxiety and paranoia. Others experienced hallucinations, memory problems, emotional instability, or long-lasting depression. Certain subjects struggled to return to normal life after exposure to intense psychological manipulation and experimental substances. What intelligence officials viewed as research often left behind emotional damage that continued for years. One of the most disturbing aspects of MKUltra was the uncertainty surrounding how many people were truly affected. Because the program operated in secrecy, records were incomplete, hidden, or intentionally fragmented. Victims often had no proof they had been involved in government experiments. Many only discovered possible connections years later, after investigations into the program became public. At the same time, rumors and disturbing stories began circulating inside intelligence and research communities. There were reports of individuals suffering mental breakdowns after experimental sessions. Some cases involved unexplained behavior changes, psychological collapse, or mysterious circumstances that raised serious concerns. Although official explanations were often vague, suspicion continued to grow around the program and its methods. One particularly controversial case involved a scientist connected to the program who died under mysterious circumstances after unknowingly being exposed to LSD. Questions surrounding the incident fueled speculation about the risks and recklessness inside the experiments. To critics, the case symbolized how dangerous the program had become, even for those working within it. But despite warning signs, the secrecy surrounding MKUltra protected it from public scrutiny for years. Inside the Central Intelligence Agency, information was heavily compartmentalized. Only select individuals understood the broader structure of the operation. Different subprojects operated independently, often under coded names designed to conceal their true purpose. This made it difficult for outsiders, and sometimes even insiders, to fully understand what was taking place. As public trust in government institutions began declining during the 1960s and 1970s, investigative journalists and congressional committees started examining secret intelligence activities more closely. The political climate had changed. Citizens were becoming increasingly skeptical of hidden government operations, especially after major national controversies and growing anti-war sentiment. Pressure slowly built around the intelligence community. Questions emerged about illegal surveillance, covert activities, and possible abuses of power. Eventually, investigators began uncovering references to unusual experiments connected to behavioral research and mind control. The existence of MKUltra slowly started to surface. For many Americans, the revelations were shocking. Reports suggested that the government had secretly funded experiments involving drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation. Worse still, some experiments appeared to have been conducted on individuals without consent or awareness. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Newspapers published alarming headlines. Television programs discussed the possibility that intelligence agencies had crossed ethical and legal boundaries in pursuit of Cold War objectives. Critics argued that fear and secrecy had allowed dangerous experimentation to continue unchecked for years. Congressional investigations soon followed. Government officials were called to testify about intelligence programs and covert research projects. Senators demanded answers regarding human experimentation, oversight failures, and the destruction of evidence connected to MKUltra. But by then, much of the documentation had already disappeared. In one of the most controversial actions surrounding the program, large numbers of MKUltra records had been deliberately destroyed years earlier. This decision severely limited investigators' ability to determine the full scale of the operation. Without complete records, many questions could never be fully answered. How many people were involved? How extensive were the experiments? What methods were truly tested? The destruction of evidence only deepened public suspicion. To some observers, MKUltra became more than just a secret program. It became a symbol of what can happen when intelligence agencies operate without transparency or accountability. The combination of secrecy, experimentation, and missing records created an atmosphere where rumors and conspiracy theories flourished alongside confirmed facts. Even decades later, the controversy surrounding MKUltra remains powerful. Some view it as a product of Cold War paranoia, driven by fear of enemy capabilities. Others see it as evidence of how quickly ethical limits can collapse when governments justify extreme actions in the name of national security. What is certain is that the program left behind unanswered questions, damaged lives, and a legacy that continues to disturb people around the world. Because once the public learned that secret experiments on the human mind had truly taken place, trust was never quite the same again. As public investigations exposed parts of MKUltra to the world, the program officially came to an end. Intelligence officials claimed the experiments had been terminated, and government agencies promised reforms designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. New oversight measures were introduced, and public statements emphasized accountability and ethical standards. But for many people, the damage had already been done. The revelations surrounding MKUltra fundamentally changed how the public viewed secret government operations. For decades, intelligence agencies had operated in the shadows, often protected by secrecy and national security arguments. Yet the discovery that human experimentation had occurred without consent shattered public confidence in ways that would last for generations. Even after official investigations concluded, many questions remained unanswered. Because so many records had been destroyed, the full scale of MKUltra could never be completely reconstructed. Investigators were left with fragments, partial documents, testimony, and scattered evidence pointing toward a much larger operation hidden behind layers of secrecy. This uncertainty created the perfect environment for speculation. Some people believed the experiments described in official reports were only a small portion of what truly happened. Others wondered whether similar research programs had continued under different names after MKUltra was supposedly shut down. The lack of complete information made it impossible to fully separate fact from theory. Over time, MKUltra became deeply connected to conspiracy culture. Books, documentaries, television shows, and films began exploring the idea of government mind control experiments. References to secret conditioning, behavioral manipulation, and psychological programming appeared throughout popular culture. The name MKUltra itself evolved into a symbol, representing hidden power, secrecy, and the fear that governments might possess methods of influencing human behavior beyond public awareness. Some theories became increasingly extreme. Claims emerged suggesting connections between MKUltra and assassinations, celebrity behavior, mass manipulation, or hidden psychological programs that allegedly continued into modern times. While many of these ideas remain unsupported by evidence, the existence of the real program gave such theories unusual staying power. After all, MKUltra proved that intelligence agencies had once explored methods of influencing the human mind in secret. That fact alone permanently changed public perception. At the same time, historians and researchers continued debating how the program should be understood. Some argued it reflected the extreme fear and paranoia of the Cold War era, a period when governments believed they were engaged in an invisible battle for survival. Others argued that fear could never justify the ethical violations committed during the experiments. This debate raised larger questions about national security and human rights. How far should governments be allowed to go in the name of protection? Can secrecy ever truly coexist with accountability? And what happens when scientific research is driven by fear instead of ethics? These questions remain relevant even today. Modern technology has created new concerns about surveillance, psychological influence, and information control. Social media algorithms, targeted propaganda, digital monitoring, and behavioral analysis have all sparked discussions about how easily human thought and decision-making can be influenced in the modern world. While these technologies are very different from the experiments conducted during MKUltra, the underlying fear remains similar: the fear that powerful institutions may possess tools capable of shaping perception without public awareness. Because of this, MKUltra continues to hold a unique place in modern history. It is remembered not only as a covert intelligence program, but as a warning about what can happen when secrecy removes ethical boundaries. The project demonstrated how fear, political pressure, and unchecked authority can push governments toward actions that would otherwise seem unimaginable. And yet, despite decades of investigations and public discussion, the full truth may never be known. Too many documents were destroyed. Too many operations remained compartmentalized. Too many details disappeared before investigators could uncover them completely. What survives today is a mixture of confirmed history, unanswered questions, and lingering suspicion. For some, MKUltra is simply a dark chapter of Cold War history. For others, it represents proof that governments are capable of far more than the public realizes. But regardless of interpretation, one thing is certain. Operation MKUltra left behind a legacy defined by secrecy, controversy, and distrust. A reminder that some of the most dangerous battles are not fought on battlefields, but inside the human mind itself.